Rising 368 meters into the Berlin sky, the Fernsehturm, the Berlin TV tower, is one of the city's most iconic landmarks. Today it attracts more than 1 million visitors each year. The origin of this tower lies in the Cold War era. In this video we'll dive into the history of this tower. This is the Berlin TV tower. Well, to be correct, this was planned to become the Berlin TV tower at first. What happened? In 1952, the East German Deutsche Post, the postal and telecommunication department of the German Democratic Republic, the GDR, started making plans for a television tower. They soon found a location that was suitable from a geographical point of view. If it were built atop Berlin's Müggelberge hills, it would already be around 70 meters above the city. The tower was planned to be 132 meters high. In May 1954, construction work started, but 1.5 years later, building stopped. What was the reason? The problem was that it would be right in the path of planes coming into land at East Germany's main airport, Berlin-Schönefeld. Not long after that, plans were picked up for a tower at a different location. After years of twists and turns, they decided that the tower had to be built in the city center. Previously, there had been plans for a huge building to house the government, but they'd been cancelled. In 1961, the Berlin Wall had been built and things had changed. The wall, the largest construction of East Germany, had cost a fortune, leaving no money for a dominant central governmental building, which, as a result, was postponed. They still had to build a TV tower though. It was needed for radio and TV broadcasting, being an instrument to spread propaganda. On top of that, it would make the city center more modern and appealing, and it would attract tourists. Last but not least, it was a prestige project. Berlin had now become the center of the Cold War. West Berlin also had plans to build a TV tower, but they'd been struggling for years to get it built. If a huge TV tower now rose up in East Berlin, being clearly visible from West Berlin, that would be an ideal way to show the superiority of socialist Germany. The Berliner Fernsehturm wasn't an isolated project all on its own. It was part of a redesign of the whole area around it as well. Architect Hermann Henselmann had come up with a proposal for the redesign of the East Berlin Center back in 1959, and that plan featured a TV tower that was similar to the one that we all know, with a sphere near the top. But Henselmann's plan, covering the whole area from the Alexanderplatz to the Marx-Engels-Forum, did not win the approval of Walter Ulbricht, who was the first secretary, the leader of the country. It wasn't that he was against the idea of the tower, it was other parts of the plan that he didn't like. For one thing, the Berlin Cathedral would have to be demolished, and that was not desirable. In 1960, the idea was to build the tower in the Friedrichshain Volkspark, but that plan was also cancelled. The location had to be more central. The concept was to build a tower that was similar to the Moscow Ostankino Tower, which was a 540-meter-high TV tower that had been under construction since 1963. But unfortunately, a tower of that height in the center of Berlin was technically impossible. So now the plan was to build a 360-meter tower on the Marx-Engels-Forum. But that plan didn't last long either. At the beginning of July 1964, the Council of Ministers decided against it. A new complicating factor had arisen. The planned location would again be exactly in the flight path of an airport. But this time it was a West Berlin airport, Tempelhof Airport in the American sector. Planes would sometimes fly as low as 300 meters. Building the tower would mean risking a conflict with the West and the possibility that they would block the air traffic to Schönefeld Airport in return. Gerhard Kosel, who was the appointed leader of the TV tower project, didn't agree with this decision, and he used his connections to make sure that the tower would definitely be built in the city center. As a result of Kosel's lobbying, less than 2 weeks later, the Politburo, the highest decision-making body of the GDR, decided that the tower was indeed to be built in the city center. A study to determine the exact location then followed and concluded that building the tower just in front of the Alexanderplatz station in the middle between the Karl-Liebknecht-Straße and the Rathausstraße would lead to the best visibility in both East and West Berlin. But still, not everyone was convinced of this location. To make sure that he got his way, Kosel again forced the decision-making process. He provided the Politburo with a cost estimate based on his favorite location. He claimed that the tower would cost 33 million marks. His estimate had no basis in reality. It was fictitious and much too low. But Kosel's plan worked. At the end of September 1964, the Politburo gave the go-ahead. But Kosel had not finished trying to get the decisions he wanted. The shape of the TV tower had been carried over from the Friedrichshain project, looking a bit like the Moscow Tower. Kosel, however, thought that the design was not attractive enough and wanted the one that architect Hermann Henselmann had made in 1959, containing the sphere, which he thought would be much more memorable and fit much better into the city center. Despite the fact that Kosel and Henselmann were rivals, Kosel asked Henselmann to redesign the tower based on his previous drawings. And so Henselmann, who was one of the most creative architects in the GDR, came up with a design that we all know today. Henselmann wanted it to be a tribute to aerospace. The shaft was to be reminiscent of a rocket, and the sphere was meant to resemble the satellite Sputnik 1 that the Soviets launched in 1957. And in January 1965, Henselmann's design was formally approved. The TV tower stands in the Marienviertel, the area around St. Mary's Church, one of the oldest parts of Berlin. However, a lot of it had been destroyed during the Second World War. Now the redesign of East Berlin's city center meant that the rest was to be flattened as well. In February 1965, the preparations for the construction started by demolishing the old Marienviertel buildings. The Marienkirche, St. Mary's Church, survived, however. The Marienkirche had become the most important church in East Berlin after the Second World War. Many other churches had been completely destroyed. In 1964, Martin Luther King had visited the church and preached a sermon. Now that the whole area was to become the shop window of the GDR, also the church had to be renovated. Construction of the tower started in May 1965, after all the buildings had been demolished. But, in fact, this was all illegal, because there was no valid building permit. The reason was that there still was no realistic calculation of the final cost. Gerhard Kosel did whatever he had to do to keep the work going. The Berlin TV tower was the first tower in the world with a sphere. That sphere, of course, had to be shiny and stay that way, which meant any form of rust was unacceptable, and it had to keep its silvery appearance despite the air pollution, like the Chrysler Building in New York. But this type of steel was not produced in the GDR. It wasn't produced anywhere in the whole Eastern Bloc. What was to become a symbol of socialism needed some help from the capitalist West. The project leaders were forced to buy the stainless steel from West Germany. And not only the steel. There was more that came from Western countries. The glass used for the sphere came from Belgium, and the air conditioning and the elevators came from Sweden. And the insulation material of the sphere and the aviation lights also came from West Germany. Along with the tower, new building complexes were built in Karl-Liebknecht-Straße and Rathausstraße. Because of the limited availability of building equipment, they couldn't do it all at once. The Rathauspassagen, blocks of flats with shops underneath, south of the tower, were finished in 1972. And the complex in Karl-Liebknecht-Straße, north of the tower, was only completely finished in the summer of 1973. These ensembles of buildings displayed a standard that was higher than what was common in the GDR. Along with apartments and offices at these locations, you could also find shops that we would nowadays call the flagship stores of East German brands. And as in the case of the Fernsehturm, it involved buying some materials, equipment and even computers from the West. During the first months of construction of the tower, the total cost estimation had already increased by 20%. In October 1965, final cost was estimated to be 39 million marks. The Council of Ministers demanded an inspection of the project. When the report came out, it contained a list of the many flaws of the project. The main responsible? Gerhard Kosel. He took most of the blame for pushing through the decision to start building without a valid permit, and for having provided an unrealistic estimate of the cost. In December 1965, Kosel was dismissed from his role as project leader. Henselmann was demoted, but was still allowed to continue to work for the project. Research was done on trying to cut costs by replacing the sphere with a kind of cylinder, but construction was already at an advanced phase. Cutting cost might have been possible, but it would also have delayed the completion date, so it was decided to continue as planned. The tower was finished on the 30th of September 1969, and its official opening was on the 3rd of October, so it was completely just within the deadline of the 20th anniversary of the German Democratic Republic 4 days later. With its height of 365 meters, it was the second highest TV tower in the world. Only the Moscow Tower was higher, and it was the first TV tower in the world with a sphere. The observation deck at 203 meters provides a spectacular view over Berlin. From the tower, people could also look into the west. Depending on the weather conditions, you can see up to 80 kilometers. On the upper floor of the sphere, there was the Telecafé, a restaurant where you could be seated next to panoramic windows. A rotating platform would make sure that in 60 minutes you got a 360 degrees view without leaving your seat. The idea of a rotating restaurant was copied from the West German Dortmund TV tower. Just recently, a new restaurant opened at this floor. Restaurant Sphere offers a wide variety of dishes with a nod to the GDR. It won't surprise you to learn that the ever-present security agency, the Stasi, had its own quarters in the tower, just above the sphere at 241 meters. With photo equipment with powerful lenses, Stasi employees observed what was happening in the area around the tower, which included the Alexanderplatz, of course only if the weather was good enough. The Berlin TV tower was a propaganda symbol of socialism. A funny anecdote is that because of reflections of the sun, a cross was visible on the sphere, which was quite annoying for the atheist GDR. The reflection is nicknamed the Pope's Revenge. Even US President Ronald Reagan mentioned the cross in his speech during his visit to West Berlin in 1987.
Years ago, before the East Germans began rebuilding their churches, they erected a secular structure, the television tower at Alexanderplatz. Virtually ever since, the authorities have been working to correct what they view as the tower's one major flaw. Treating the glass sphere at the top with paints and chemicals of every kind. Yet even today, when the sun strikes that sphere that towers over all Berlin, the light makes the sign of the cross.
The area between the Spandauer Straße and the river Spree, and also the Marx-Engels-Platz on the other side of the river, were also part of the construction area. The location where you can find the monument to Marx and Engels was being worked on when I was there. It is currently being refurbished, but respecting the original design. And on the subject of the Marx-Engels-Platz, now that a TV tower was being built, they still needed a new home for the government. The first plans for a new design of the East German capital in the late 1950s also contained drawings of skyscrapers that would demonstrate the power of the government. The decision to construct a so-called central building was made in 1973. 3 years later, the Palast der Republik opened. I made a separate video about the Palast der Republik. Feel free to check it out here or click the link in the description after you've finished watching this video. The Berlin Fernsehturm today, with its 368 meters, is still Germany's tallest building. It is not a symbol of socialism anymore. It has become a symbol of Berlin itself, and it's embraced by the Berliners. Its popularity proves this. Berlin without its TV tower would be like Paris without the Eiffel Tower. That's it for today. Thanks for watching, liking and subscribing, and thanks to all of you who have shown their appreciation via a super thanks. If you want to support this channel, you may want to use the hotel reservation link on the EastGermanyInvestigated.com website when booking your hotel stay in Berlin, Germany or elsewhere in the world. Hope to see you in the next one.